Well, good afternoon or good morning. Welcome to Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show. A show that is dedicated to progressive rock, hard rock, heavy metal, and other forms of rock and rock-related music. So today, we're doing my series, which is Rock Greats Who Have Thrilled Us But Have Since Passed On. Now, this is episode number 38, I believe. Yes, I think it's number 38. I don't have my notes. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe I do. Let's get this right. I did have them in front of me anyways. Yeah, number 38 from the year 2001. An interesting year. Quite a few people passed along this year. So I had somewhat a debate over who I was going to initially do. Actually, originally I had two other people in the list to do rather than the two I had. But once I examined the list, because initially what I went through and I picked two people for each year through the entire thing, and so I kind of scanned everything. So once I did a thorough search through the list, I discovered a few other people that I just thought were better. And in this case, that was the case because I don't need these on right now. I had, like I said, I had two other people originally, and then there was a couple of others that I seen, and then I finally ended up with the two people I have, who I'm quite pleased to be able to do. Well, not pleased in the sense that I'm happy they're gone, pleased in the sense that I can do them. Both of them, I think, have had some musical impact on me over time, different time periods actually. Some of the stuff they did, I quite like. They're not a top 20 or 30 people, but they're definitely some people that I've listened to, and especially one of them I've been listening to quite a bit. So anyways, without further ado, we're going to start this episode. So the two people I chose today were John Lee Hooker of blues fame and George Harrison of Beatles fame. I don't see how you can not do George Harrison. To me, he was the best Beatle. It certainly was my favorite of the Beatles. He was an interesting, complex person, I think, who was deeply spiritual and concerned about other people. And he got along fairly well. Considering the fame and where he came from, his seemingly lack of ego is actually quite impressive. But anyways, we're doing John Lee Hooker first because, as you know, I prefer to do them chronologically according to their time of passing. So John Lee Hooker will go first. Okay, for me, John, and then of course, in case I forget to mention this, I will do the honorable mentions at the end. And there's a fair number of them this year. I hope I got at least an honorable mention for the people that you like as well. Okay, so John Lee Hooker's date of birth, well, his vital stats, being his date of birth being one of them, is somewhat in suspect or question. According to records, he was born on August the 22nd. Now, I always find this amazing that they know the day he was born. They always get the day. The day is never in question. However, the year is in question. So it's kind of funny. Like, they know what day it was, but they're not sure what year it was. Seems like there was more days to expand the year than there was days to expand the day, right? At any rate, he was born August the 22nd, according to them, either 1914 or 1917. And then, of course, you're going to see that there's other dates here too, but we'll get into that after. I'm not sure I'm going to get this right, but it's Tutwiler, Tallahatchie County in Mississippi. He then died on June the 21st, 2001, at either 83 or 88 or some age in that grouping, in Los Altos, California, at his home. He actually died in his sleep, a natural death. have we had any rock stars die like that since I started? I don't think so. This is not a common way to pass among rock stars. Okay. Instrumentally, he was a vocalist and a guitar player, of course, and he was active from 1930 right up to his death in 2001. Okay, so I'm just going to give you some of the brief history of him because I want to make sure I'm clear about this. This is not a history lesson, because if it was, I'm probably going to fail. I always did in school. There's no reason to think that that's going to change now. However, I just want to talk about the man's music and his legacy and the stuff I've enjoyed and give him kudos for that stuff, because I think a lot of what John Lee Hooker did is quite impactful and definitely influential for a lot of modern musicians. Okay, his birth date is in dispute. Basically, he was saying that he was born in 1917. However, census taken in 1920 state that he was about 7 years old at the time, which, if you do the math, would mean he was born in 2013 or 2014, if you prefer. He was also so there's this kind of debate as to, because they celebrated his century mark a few years ago in 2017, but he actually was past that by then. I don't know who to believe. Like, do you believe John Lee Hooker that he was born in 2017? I mean, how would he know? He was born, so how many of us are completely aware of the day and the month and the year when we're born? So he's going on what his parents probably told him. And when do you start becoming cognizant of the day or the year you were born? Like, when does that start factoring into your thinking? I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8. I guess it's different for everybody. I personally remember being 5 years old in 1969, because that's the year I started school. Well, maybe he would, but he didn't really start school in that year, and I think a lot of the kids in that time period didn't. They were homeschooled, which isn't the same as homeschooled now. Back then, perhaps it simply meant that there was no school to go to, so whatever his parents taught him at home was what he learned. More than likely, that was the case. So at any rate, my guess is the census is probably right, because the census people, they do a census, they add it up, and these people would have to fill it in. And I don't know what the census were like in 1920, but I know now if you lie upon them, it's not really something you can get away with. So I don't know that it was quite so stringent in 1920. So perhaps they lied that he was 7 or 8 or whatever, but he was alive at that point and moving around, fairly large kid. So in all likelihood, he wasn't born in 1917. More likely, he was born in the earlier year. So I'm going to go with 1914 for this video, and hopefully, I don't really see that it will really make much of a difference anyways. It's just, this was quite common, especially with African American children in the early part of last century. There's many of this happens quite a bit in baseball, where they have no idea how old the person is, because records weren't as kept as well back then, especially for African American kids. Anyways, get on to it, right? Okay, so after his father passed, his mother then remarried a blues singer named William Moore, who probably was probably the first real influence musically to John Lee Hooker, because he was a blues singer, and John Lee Hooker probably emulated him in a lot of ways. This is normal for a young person to do this, right? So then his next influence after that was probably Tony Hollins, who was dating his sister. So a guy who was hanging around dating his sister, and he was a guitar player and a blues guitar player, so John Lee Hooker probably gravitated to him. this guy apparently gave him his first acoustic guitar and then taught him some stuff on it. So he was probably like a god to him. At that stage of the game, anybody who's paying attention to you and teaching you and showing you something you really want and really love, you're going to think of him as a god. Those were his first two influences. For some reason, at age 14, he ran away, and who knows why. Maybe there was some violence in the home, or maybe he didn't get enough attention, or who the hell knows what was going on then. People will say whatever they want to say about why people did what they did, but I'm not here to give a history lesson. Just state the fact that he left at 14 years of age, and he worked in Detroit at the Ford Motor Company. My guess is he probably worked in the cleaning department or something like that, or as a janitor, and he worked there for probably a fairly lengthy time. And at this point in time, he was probably playing guitar and learning his trade. At that time, he probably didn't even know that he was going to be a musician. He just had a love for it. So wherever he had a chance to play, he probably played. Whatever concerts he was able to play at, he played at. Whatever venues would accept him, he probably played at. Not that uncommon from a lot of blues musicians of that era. So, anyways, at some point he bought his first electric guitar, and my guess is, excuse me, I've been writing on this thing for a while. It tends to make me tired. So anyways, and I wanted to apologize because I know this was supposed to come out yesterday morning, but with the ongoing reset of a lot of stuff, including my back part here, I decided to do the videos when everything was done and out of the way. So you're going to get this one as soon as it's done, and you'll get tomorrow morning, and then hopefully I will be back on track, and there'll be one Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday next week. So again, like I said, I apologize for the kind of onward delays here, but such is the life of the elderly. Okay, so anyways, back to where I was. So at this point in time, he was probably playing acoustic guitar a lot, but decided he wanted to be a little bit more modern. That's my guess. Because he was living in Detroit, and in Detroit at that time, piano was a very dominant instrument. And, acoustic guitar versus a piano, I would think people probably were drawn more to the piano because it had more of a range, sounded more crisper than the acoustic guitar. So he decided at some point that he needed an electric guitar to draw more attention. That's my guess. And so he bought his first electric guitar. And I'm guessing from that point on, it probably started to expel his career. Okay, so so and what the note said that I read was that he was working as a janitor, and that was probably at the Ford Motor Plant or some other factory. And back in those days, people moved around. Maybe not as much as they do now, but they did. And anyways, he started playing at clubs and launched his career. So this was in the 1940s, 50s. By the 1960s, he was probably a fairly well-established blues player, well-known, but not really a major. I wouldn't say he wasn't major. I should say that he probably wasn't nationally known. That's probably maybe a best way to put it. Not worldly known or nationally known, but among musicians probably well known. Probably among the local populations well known. And by the time he got to the 60s, this is when the British invasion occurred, and a lot of those British bands took their music from obscure blues bands in the U.S. Southern Belt. And probably to a lesser degree, blues in general in the United States. It's funny how the United States didn't take that, but the British, for some reason, were enthralled with this. You know, if you look at the Stones and the Beatles and the Who and the Kinks and all of those big bands that came out of the 60s, they were all cite a lot of people like Muddy Waters and John Lee Hooker and, you know, I can't think of anybody else right now, but those two anyways, as being huge influences on the mob. The notable guitar player Buddy Guy and a few others like that, right? So anyways, and he started to get kind of a revival from that. So what happened to him is he did this European tour, and I think it was in the 80s, early 80s. I forgot to write the date down, and this really blew him up, like, because all those people had long been listening to his obscure stuff. That's the way they were there, and he just was like a legend to them. And then his fame gradually spread. He worked with a lot of notable people. For me, of all the blues players that I have stuff, I don't have a lot of stuff for a lot of blues players or people, but I do listen to blues. I'm not a huge blues fan, but I do like stuff. Of all of them, I like him probably the best. And I'm not really sure why. I have the album Boom Boom that's in my playlist right now. I really think this is a great album. I play it all the time. There's a lot of tracks on there that are just so bluesy, but I don't know, they have some modern impact, I think. You know, even though they really are dated, but quite influential stuff. So anyways, this is a guy who, you know, just had a huge impact, and he played a lot, and he loved to play, and he loved the music, and he was rewarded at the end, I guess, by dying in his sleep, as opposed to drug overdose or being murdered or being run over or have a plane crash or any number of things that kill rock stars. And I think he had a huge impact on a lot of rock stars as well. So there you have it. John Lee Hooker, blues legend, guitar legend. So now we're going to talk about the other guy who seems to always be the other guy, George Harrison, the Quiet Beetle, as they said. He found that to be somewhat humorous, how that came about, and we'll talk about that too. So anyways, the number 2 guy is George Harrison of the Beatles and the Traveling Wilburys, if you like to add that in too, because that band did very well for the 2 albums they released, even though their second album was Volume 3, which was George's idea of like confusing people. So pretty good. The people were looking around, how did I miss album 2, and looking around for an album that doesn't exist, right? Hilarious. I like it. It's typical British humor, right? So anyways, George Harrison, we'll give you the vitals first. He was born February the 25th, 1943 in Liverpool, England. Died November the 29th, 2001 at the age of 58. My age. Not making me feel good here. In Los Angeles, California. The music he played, of course, was rock and pop, and he also liked the Indian classical stuff as well. His instruments, of course, he was a lead singer, vocalist, but he also was the lead guitarist for the Beatles, and he also played the sitar, that immortalized instrument that everybody remembers Brian Jones playing, but he also played it, and he played it well too. He was active from 1958 to 2001 upon his death, right? He has one notable child. Well, he has one child, really, about one notable family member, I guess is the better way to put it. His name was Danny Harrison, spelled D-H-A-N-I, his son, and he's also a bit of a music person. He finished off George Harrison's last album as well. Okay, so his history was the 4th of 5 children, so the baby. So my experience with the youngest child, and maybe I don't know if it applies to George Harrison, but Usually the youngest child is the most spoiled, gets away with the most, and usually ends up being the most problem. But he doesn't seem to have been that way, at least not in the doings that I've seen by him. His mother was very encouraging. She encouraged all her children to pursue what they wanted to pursue, and George's was music. He loved music from the beginning. There was one thing that I found interesting. His mother played the Indian music, including the sitar, while she was still carrying George Harrison, and her belief was that this would soothe the child and make entry into the world not so shocking, I guess. And I don't know if that had an impact on him, but he certainly embraced the Indian way of life and their culture and their music and their religion and everything. So I'm going to have to say either his mother had a huge influence on him, or maybe this had an influence on him. And probably a little bit of both, or a lot of one and maybe a little bit of the other, who knows. His early influences on guitar were Django Reinhardt, Hoagy Carmichael, and by the 1950s he was also interested in Lonnie Donegan and Carl Perkins. Pretty standard. There was other people as well, but those are the main ones. He was moved by the guitar. His first person he saw playing the guitar was Slim Whitman. So that impressed him. That first time you ever see something and it just has a huge impact on you. In my case, the first real musical impact, I listened to some of the 50s stuff that my parents listened to, including the Four Seasons and stuff like that. And I liked it quite a bit, but it really didn't have much of an impact on me. I would listen to it. I liked it. It wasn't until I walked in that store when I was probably 13 years old or 12 years old, and I saw that Kiss album, Kiss Alive, and I saw those guys in their uniforms or in their costumes on stage playing guitar. That had a huge impact on me, and I was hooked from that point on. I'm thinking that this Slim Whitman thing probably had the same effect on him. So he was talked by Paul McCartney into auditioning for the Quarrymen. So for you who aren't familiar with the Quarrymen, I can't believe it, but if there are people out there who aren't, probably younger people who, of course, it's been 40, 50 years, 60 years since the Beatles. So there are a lot of people who do not even know who they are. I know that's hard to believe, but it's the truth. But anyways, what happened was he was talked by Paul McCartney into auditioning for the Quarrymen. Now at this time, the Quarrymen were basically John Lennon and Paul McCartney, and they decided to audition a guitar player because McCartney's I think Lennon is a good guitar player, but he's not really a lead guitar player type. So they auditioned him for lead guitar, and he played very well, but Lennon really thought he was just too young. So McCartney waited, and when they were leaving on a tour bus to go somewhere, he brought George Harrison with him, and George Harrison played a lead part on a song, and John really liked his lead ability. So after that, he began to fill in where they asked him to fill in as guitarist here, guitar there, or whatever. And eventually he just became a member of the Quarrymen. So then you had McCartney, Lennon, and Harrison playing in the Quarrymen. And eventually the band, as we know, changed into the Beatles. However, initially that's how we got started. Okay, so they did these gigs in Hamburg, Germany. This was something that was set up by promoters to promote the English music. Some other bands were, if you remember correctly, I did a video on Rory, and he was supposed to go with his group to Hamburg, but at the last minute they kind of bailed out and the Beatles replaced them. This had a big impact on the Beatles. Over there they were well liked. However, George was deported because of his age, underage, and couldn't work, so he had to go back to England. However, upon returning to England, they began to have their first kind of, how do you want to say, their first kind of albums, Please Please Me, and that kind of stuff, and so they started to become well known. And then they went on that 1964 tour to the United States, in which they played on the Ed Sullivan Show, and they were already blowing up, but that just blew them off the map. And at that rate, that's where he gained the nickname, the Quiet Beetle. But it wasn't because he was necessarily quiet. He always found this humorous. It was because, he's a lead singer in one if not the biggest band in the world. So he's in front of 1 million people. I hardly think he's quiet, but they gave him that because he had strep throat and didn't talk much, which is normal when you have strep throat. So at any rate, that's where he got that name. He then began to lead the Beatles along a path towards more folky music and Indian style music. This is where it came from, that the Indian music and folky stuff that you hear by the Beatles later on. He was the leader of that. He was the one that pushed for that movement. In 1967, the Beatles released a landmark progressive rock album, a landmark concept album, if you prefer. They took a huge change. They had already started to change with Rubber Soul and Revolver, but began to move even further with this album. When I think this is the beginning of psychedelic and progressive rock, if you ask me. But anyways, he played more songs on that album than he had before. He was playing more as they went on. Started with Rubber Soul and Revolver and moved on. It's interesting how his interpretation of the album was there was like five or like half the tracks or so on the album he loved, and the other half he couldn't stand. Isn't that always the way? Yeah. And he became a little bit frustrated by the musical access to the group. Like even though he was writing more songs and singing more, he still was limited to his 2 or 3 tracks on an album because the other 2 guys wrote everything else and did everything else, right? And so, it's a bit frustrating for him. He's trying to develop, and this is in his way. So he actually recorded his very last track with the Beatles on January the 4th, 1970, along with Ringo Starr and Paul McCartney, and they performed one of the last tracks he performed. Actually, the last track he performed with the Beatles. So some of the other stuff about him: he was married, and then he divorced, and then he remarried a girl that and they had a son, Danny, and he stayed with her for the rest of his life. And I believe I think he was married to the first one until the late 70s, and then he remarried the other one the following year. It might have been 78. So he was not a big tour guy. Like, the Beatles didn't tour much in their last 4 or 5 years together, and then he didn't tour much. He did tour some of his solo stuff, but he didn't tour a lot. And he had it wasn't until he got to the Traveling Wilburys that he began to tour a fair bit. So this band did platinum business. Like, they sold, their album went platinum, their first album, and then I think their subsequent album that took place many years later, like 4 or 5 years later, also did platinum business. Okay, so the band, which was called the Traveling Wilburys, decided to take on kind of this persona. They were half brothers, and to another guy named Wilbury. So they all took on half brother names, and his was Nelson Nelson Wilbury. That's the name he took on. But the other guys in the band, of course, were Jeff Linaviello, Roy Orbison, Bob Dylan, and of course Tom Petty. It's funny, everybody on this is gone now except for Bob Dylan and Jeff Lynne are still alive, but the others are all gone. And they traveled around and they played this album, and it basically it started by them just helping George record some stuff in his garage, and then they just say, hey, let's just do something with this, and so that's where this whole thing came about. And he did a lot of one-off concerts too, where he played a one-off with longtime friend Eric Clapton. He played at a Bob Dylan tribute he played on stage with Clapton, McGinn, Neil Young, and Bob Dylan. And then he had an incident that occurred about 4 years prior to his death. I think it was in 97, or it might have been 98, that he had an intruder, a mental patient, who broke into the house and stabbed him. I don't know, it sounds like he was stabbed about 40 times, but probably most of them were just small wounds, but the one in his heart, or the one in his lung, was serious damage, had to have part of his lung removed. And when the guy was released years later, he apologized to the Harrison family and for his mental state and hoped that they could forgive him for the attack. Harrison did not die from this attack. However, his health had improved from his original bout with cancer. He had throat cancer and seemed to be over that and was recovering, and then this happens, and then he seemed to have a regression which turned into lung cancer and eventually brain cancer, and eventually he died. So he died in 2001, as we've already stated, of pretty much lung cancer. A short life for, to me, a legendary musician, well liked, well respected, a good guitar player, and I just think it's just too unfortunate that he had to die as a result of that. It's not a good way to go, if there's any good way to go, really. But I like George Harrison's guitar playing. I think of the four Beatles, I like him the best. I liked his guitar ability. I liked his kind of persona. I liked some of his solo music after the Beatles left as well, more so than I did either Lennon or McCartney. And I won't even talk about Ringo Starr because there's no point. So, and I hope that doesn't offend people, but too bad if it does. So, anyways, George Harrison, to me, had good guitar ability. I liked the way he played the sitar. I liked this whole kind of spiritual vibe about him. He was just a good person. And when the Beatles were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, he was the class act of that thing. He gave the Beatles some class, because McCartney, of course, didn't show up. Lennon was gone, and Ringo Starr was probably drunk, But at any rate, I thought George Harrison showed a typical Harrison personality. He thanked everybody for their fame and their fortune, and he allowed people to take part in it, and just a giving individual, and humbly thanked all the people for everything, and it just came through. He's just such a class act. So again, I hope you enjoy this particular episode. I've gone on longer than I normally do on these episodes, just because this is one of the first ones where I know quite a bit about the two people involved. I'm really bad with words these days. So now I want to give you a bit of my honorable mentions, because there's quite a few of them this time around. So we'll start with, of course, a few years ago we did Roy Rogers, so now we're going to just mention Dale Evans died this year as well. Glenn Hughes, not the Deep Purple Glenn Hughes, but the guy from the Village People, passed as well. John Phillips from the Mamas and the Papas, a person I had considered as possibly doing. He was definitely in there in the run. Paul Peak from Gene Vincent and the Blue Caps. Joey Ramone from the Ramones, of course, another kind of Traveling Wilbury type thing. But the Ramones, of course, were a punk band. So, and Joey was the lead vocalist. I thought about doing him as well. Billy Higgins, who was a jazz drummer and great. James E. Myers, a producer of Bill Haley and the Comets, who I quite like as well. Perry Como, of course, the renowned relaxation singer. Sorry, that's a joke. Chet Atkins, guitar legend. Leon Wilkinson, Leonard Skinner, played with him his whole career. Ronald Townsend of the Fifth Dimension vocal group, great group. Melanie Thornton, Maria Serrero, and Natalie Van Heet, and who all were killed in a plane crash while on tour. Not musicians that I would listen to normally, but you know, anytime that happens, you want to mention these people just because it's unfortunate. And then I think it's Frankie. Yeah. Oh, Frankie Gay. Frankie Gay, brother of Marvin Gaye. That's who I was trying to think of. Okay, so I've done the honorable mentions now, and I just want to thank you for participating or for watching the video. I hope you enjoy this one. It will come out immediately upon uploading it. There will be another one out tomorrow morning from the series number 39, I believe. Yeah, because today was 38, so 39. And then there'll be one Wednesday, one Friday, and one Sunday next week as we try to get back to a normal pace here. So again, I hope you've enjoyed this, and have a great day, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Subscribe, leave a comments if you want, like it if you like the video. So have a great day. From Prog Monster, bye.